Hello and welcome to this Beyond Exploring session. I am your host, Robert Crighton, and today we are finishing our exploration of the tragedy of Gorboduc, or otherwise known the tragedy of Fergus and Porrex. It was performed January 1561, or 62, I suppose, depending on how you count the years. It was written by Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville. Thomas Norton, it seems, wrote the first three acts, and Thomas Sackville wrote the last two. I think it'd be fair to say that they manage a remarkable consistency of style in the story as we've gone. Though we might argue that that Sackville is much better at the set-piece speeches. I think Sascha really enjoyed yesterday doing the really fantastic speech that opened Act 4 as the mother of the and wife to Gorboduc and mother to the two sons really goes for it in a wonderful speech of child murdering. I suppose I should throw in a trigger warning. This is a tragedy. Terrible things happen. But luckily, you won't see them because most things are reported as offstage action. So Gorboduc has split his kingdom between his two sons, but he has given his sons advisors to try and keep them in line. The two sons ignored the advisors and go for each other. The one son kills the other son, and then their mother kills the other surviving son in revenge. And Gorboduc is last seen running off stage in a bit of, I think it's fair to say, he's a little upset. Not been a good day. So that ended the first four acts. We're going into Act 5 now with a wonderful team of readers. And each act is preceded by a dumb show, some physical action with music. And we are going to be reading that and then moving on into the rest of the play. The readers who I have with me today are this wonderful team reading Gwenard, and maybe some additional material later is...
Hello, my name is Sascha Cooper, and I'm a professional actress, director, writer, and all-round performer based in Brighton in the UK. And you're right, Robert, I did enjoy that particular speech yesterday.
And reading, which we've never really decided on a firm pronunciation, Eubulus and Nuntius is... Liza?
Oh, me! Eubulus and Nuntius, yes. I'm Liza Graham, actor, singer, and Shakespearean text coach in London.
And reading Clotyn and possibly some additional material later on is...
My name is Alex Scott Fairley, and I'm an actor from the Highlands of Scotland.
And reading the part of Fergus is...
I'm Steve Longstaffe. I'm a scholar of early modern drama. I'm based in Lancaster in the UK.
And finally, reading the dumb show material and Mandud, new to the group is...
Georgia Andrews. I'm a professional actor based in London, but from all over the world, with a particular interest in early modern plays.
This is the team today. So, as I say, the sense of foreboding and dread, we've lost several characters, several sons have died in suitable Game of Thrones style, and now we're going into the final act. And so this here is both a description of, and to some degree, exposition about the dumb show before Act 5. So, Georgia, if you could do the dumb show for us, please.
First, the drums and flutes began to sound, during which there came forth upon the stage a company of harquebusiers and of armed men, all in order of battle. These, after their pieces discharged, and that the armed men had 3 times marched about the stage, departed, and then the drums and flutes did cease. Hereby was signified tumults, rebellions, arms, and civil wars to follow, as fell in the realm of Great Britain, which by the space of 50 years and more continued in civil war between the nobility, after the death of King Gorboduc and of his issues, for want of certain limitation in the succession of the crown, till the time of Dunwallo Multimus, who reduced the land to monarchy.
So, It's interesting. We've had a progression of dumb shows through the play. The play opened with a sort of demonstration of the breaking of sticks and how easy it is to break an individual stick, but a bundle of sticks is very difficult. Then we had some poisoning, which looks like it might be action from the play, but actually was sort of an allegorical drinking of poison. Then we get a funeral procession, and there was another one. Oh, the appearance of Furies. And this dumb show is much more prosaic. I think it's the most, but also stagey of them, of essentially a column of armed men doing a little battle scene, who set off discharging of pistols, presumably on their on stage, which, you know, that'll wake everybody up for Act 5. Also, I think it's interesting the use of the word, the term Great Britain as well. You know, as this a sort of ancient term for, you know, because we're in the 1560s. I don't know how common the term Great Britain is being used at this point. I know it becomes much more popular later on when we have union of countries, and that turns up in the early 1600s. But I'm just interested that it's used as a historical term there of the ancient past. Any thoughts from the room there?
I think it was to do with there being a general concern with civil war, and so they were reaching back for all kinds of examples. That was one of, and also they didn't draw the same kind of distinction that we do between different historical periods. They had a different sort of sense of history, because it was, you know, you had very short narratives of things that, you know, you didn't really know an awful lot was going on, and that kind of gave you a different sense of time, I think. You know, it could be, you know, 1600 years ago or whatever it was, but people wouldn't have felt the way about that 1600 years as we would now. But history is supposed to be exemplary, and history is for lessons. And so, in a sense, you take the lessons where you find that there's one sort of glaring civil war, which is the Wars of the Roses, which hadn't been finished that long. So possibly that's what it's to do with. It's not a Great Britain, you know, as a sort of geographical entity. It's just we can do Civil War stuff.
Yeah, and that's you know, and talking about, you know, what happens with succession, and you know, making sure lines of succession are nice and neat and tidy, because you don't want to have too many, but you also don't want to have too few people succeeding a monarch. But that might be something that's more of an issue slightly further down the line. I'm stretching. Okay. I don't think there's much more really to say about that as an opening gambit, unless Sascha has a thought in comparison with the earliest acts that we've had.
Yes. It's certainly from that very opening of that dumb show. It's very direct compared to the others. You know, it's not as flamboyant or symbolic as the other acts. In this one, it's, you know, especially with the language used, it's much more to the point as opposed to the others. I mean, immediately we get the whole thing of, right, this is what's going to happen. This is the death of King Gorboduc. This is what's going to happen. Yep, we're going to give it slightly pomp. We're going to give it pomp, but we're not going to go OTT as the first few acts. You know, we've got to calm it down here. And that's really what the fifth act seems to be about. And, you know, it's very straightforward, simple, to the point.
Well, we haven't got to the words yet, so let's see where we go. Having discharged some guns in the faces of the audience, which is always a nice neutral dramatic act, we move into Act 5 proper, and we have an opening scene with a whole selection of characters, almost none of whom we've met before in the play. The only one we have met before is the older, more trustworthy counsellor, Eubulus, I think everybody else is new. Have we met Fergus before? I don't think we have.
No, definitely not.
So they're all
Definitely
new.
not.
A battle of some sort has happened, but the audience may not know any more. So, Clotyn, Mandud, Gwenard, and Fergus, and then Eubulus all speak one after the other. Let's see where this scene goes.
Did ever age bring forth such tyrants' hearts? The brother hath bereft the brother's life. The mother, she hath dyed her cruel hands in blood of her own son, and now at last the people, lo, forgetting trouble and love, contemning quite both law and loyal hearts, even they have slain their sovereign lord and queen.
Shall this their traitorous crime unpunished rest? Even yet they cease not, carried out with rage in their rebellious roots, to threaten still a new bloodshed unto the prince's kin, to slay them all, and to uproot the race, both the king and queen. So are they moved with Porrec's death, wherein they falsely charge the guiltless king without desert at all, and traitorously have murdered him, therefore, and eke the queen.
Shall subjects dare with force to invoke revenge upon the prince's fact? Admit the worst that may, as sure in this the deed was foul, the queen to slay her own son. Shall yet the subject seek to take the sword, arise against his lord, and slay his king? Oh, wretched state, where those rebellious hearts are not rent out even from their lying breasts, and with the body thrown onto the fowls as carrion food for terror of the rest.
There can no punishment be thought too great for this so grievous crime. Let speed therefore be used therein, for it behoveth so.
Ye all, my lords, I see, consent in one, and I as one consent with ye in all. I hold it more than need, with sharpest law, to punish the tumultuous bloody rage. For nothing more may shake the common state than sufferance of uproars without redress, whereby how soon kingdoms of mighty power, after great conquests made and flourishing in fame and wealth, have been to ruin brought. I pray to Jove that we may rather wail such hap in them than witness in ourselves. Eke fully with the Duke my mind agrees that no cause serves whereby the subject may call to account the doings of his prince, much less in blood by sword to work revenge. No more than may the hand cut off the head in act nor speech. No, not in secret thought the subject may rebel against his lord, or judge of him that sits in Caesar's seat, with grudging mind bedamn those he mislikes. Though kings forget to govern as they ought, yet subjects must obey as they are bound. But now, my lords, before ye farther wade or spend your speech, what sharp revenge shall fall by justice plague on these rebellious wights? Methinks ye rather should first search the ways by which in time the rage of this uproar might be repressed, and these great tumults ceased. Even yet, the life of Britain land doth hang in traitors' balance of unequal weight. Think not, my lords, the death of Gorboduc, nor yet Videna's blood will cease their rage. Even our own lives, our wives and children, our country dearest of all, in danger stands, now to be spoiled, now made desolate, and by ourselves a conquest to ensue. Forgive once, sway unto the people's lusts to rush forth on, and stay them not in time, and as the stream that rolleth down the hills, so will the headstrong run with raging thoughts, from blood to blood, from mischief unto more, to ruin of the realm themselves and all. So giddy are the common people's minds, so glad of change, more wavering than the sea. Ye see, my lord, what strength these rebels have, what huge number is assembled still, for though the traitorous fact for which their rise be wrought and done, yet lodge they still in fields, so that how far their furies yet will stretch, great cause we have to dread, that we may seek by present battle to repress their power. Speed must be used to levy force, therefore, for either they forthwith will mischief work, or their rebellious roars forthwith will cease. These violent things may have no lasting long. Let us therefore use this for present help, persuade by gentle speech, and offer grace with gift of pardon, save unto the chief. and that upon condition that forthwith they yield the captains of their enterprise to bear such guerdon of their traitorous fact as may be both due vengeance to themselves and wholeful terror to posterity, this shall I think, scatter the greatest parts that now are holden with desire of home, wearied in field with cold of winter's nights, and some, no doubt, stricken with dread of law. When this is once proclaimed, it shall make the captains to mistrust the multitude, whose safety bids them to betray their heads, and so much more, because the rascal routs, in things of great and perilous attempts, are never trusty to the noble race. And while we treat, and stand on terms of grace, we that both stay their furies' rage the while, and eke gain time, whose only help sufficeth without war to vanquish rebels' power, in the meantime, make you in readiness such band of horsemen as ye may prepare. Horsemen, you know, are not the common strength, but are the force and store of noble men, whereby the unchosen and unarmed sort of skillless rebels, whom none other power but number makes to be of dreadful force, with sudden brunt may quickly be oppressed. And if this gentle means of proffered grace with stubborn hearts cannot so far avail as to assuage their desperate courages, then do I wish such slaughter to be made as present age and eke posterity may be adread with horror of revenge, that justly then shall on these rebels fall. This is, my lords, the sum of my advice.
And there, I think we have to pause. I don't know, my deja vu senses were playing. Yeah, this feels very Peasants' Revolty to me. This
Just
feels
a tad.
It's so similar to some of the stuff we were doing with Jack Straw. I mean, it's not literally the same, but this very cynical call of let's give the people all they want, and then while they calm down a bit, if necessary, let's kill them all.
Well, it is a playbook they return to. I mean, as you know, I've spent a bit of time writing about peasants' revolts. There'd been two commons uprisings in the previous 25 years. There was the Pilgrimage of Grace in 1536, and there was Kett's Rebellion in Norfolk in 1549. And you know, terminology there is, you know, captain is a term that, you know, captains are kind of elected. This idea of splitting the there was a great deal of social solidarity in these, which was one of the reasons why they were so feared. But it was an absolutely standard playbook tactic to, well, falsely offer pardons to people, but also to say, you give us the ringleaders, we'll let the rest of you go. So there's a strange sort of deja vu thing right between the Peasants' Revolt and, well, Kett's is the last really scary one. But even treatment of riot, right up into the 17th century, has exactly the same tropes. You know, the common people are described in exactly the same ways. There's a wonderful article which drew parallels between 1381 and the Daily Mail writing about 1981, and there were some riots in London, and it's exactly the same stuff. It's 600 years worth.
Yes, because that's the thing. The crisis of this scene and this act is not the death of the king. It's the rebellion that's risen underneath it, and the chaos that is ensuing in the land because of it. It's the you know, it's almost Gorboduc's death is almost mentioned in passing. The battle that seems to be going on is not between armies. It's people versus what's left of the state. And the person who gets to do the big, massive speech, and I think we've got to say that is a fantastic. That's score number 2 for this play for fantastic set piece speeches. Is our old friend Eubulus, who has was nowhere near as bloodthirsty as this at the beginning of the play. Wasn't he the voice of reason, as I recall, and peace?
He was indeed.
So there's a fascinating thing there. It's, you know, peace, you know, between king and his children, and don't do anything rash. And yet here he is very much we got to get our finger on this situation. I think all of these speeches move with a really nice forward momentum. I think all of those dialogue, those bits of dialogue that lead into that, you get a real sense of urgency. How did the rest of the room feel about? We haven't finished the scene yet, but how's it striking you so far?
I do like the speech ends on a violent crescendo, but for a kingdom in revolt, it seems he does seem committed to, if possible, ending this without bloodshed. To executing just the captains, but not necessarily committing peasant genocide unless they decline the terms of surrender. We start out with a very strict dogma that even if the monarch is terrible, rebellion is worse. That you subjects, stay in order. Starting with that dogma, it would be really easy to go to, well, all of them are rebels and their weapons are crap. Let's just come down on them with cavalry. But no, you need if your aim is to rule these people, or to have your kingdom sustain itself, then you need them to live. You need them to farm. You need them to work. You need them to live happy lives. Politically, this is a carrot and stick approach.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have a particularly high opinion of the commons. They don't know how to think about things. Is sort of what you say there. They'll so giddy are the common people's minds. Wavering. We've had blood to blood again, which is a recurring phrase or theme as well. But yeah, almost that their mood's infectious, and they don't know what they're doing because they're just the people.
Yeah, but then there's some very human language. The saying, the people that will take the terms of grace are the greatest part that now are holden with desire of home, wearied in field with cold of winter's nights, and some no doubt stricken with dread of law. So there's some empathy there.
How did we find the other councillors in the room? All these other new characters who we've never encountered before. I mean, Clotyn's just, I don't know, is he afraid?
As an exposition at the beginning.
Yeah. He is a bit exposition monkey, yes, I'm afraid.
They feel like we're sort of coming in the middle of a councillors meeting just to recap the key the key action, but also there is that sense of urgency and momentum in what they're saying, and the kind of emphasis on the rebellion as being a bigger concern. As you say, they are much more worried about the kind of stability, and as long as there's someone in power to advise, as opposed to having any kind of real concern over the death.
Because it's not like they're saying, and here is the new king, or we need to have a funeral for the old king. No. It's just we've got more important concerns at the moment.
It's almost like their jobs carry on regardless of who's in power. They feel quite like expositional politicians just trying to keep everyone under control. Regardless of who it's for, they will do it. That's their role.
Well, it does seem to build though. Sort of the first two, Clotyn and Mandud, seem quite expository in what they're saying, and then Gwenard sort of picks that thing up with "Shall subjects they was forced to invoke revenge upon them? How dare they? Whatever is going on, this is not the place of subjects." And then Fergus kind of builds on that with "There can no punishment be thought too great for this so grievous crime. So do whatever you want. They deserve punishment."
Kill them all.
And then as Liza says, there are those sort of hints of empathy or fellow feeling or whatever in the longer speech that sort of tempers that and follows that. I mean, the line that struck me most, or the couplet that struck me most, was "Though kings forget to govern as they ought, yet subjects must obey as they are bound," which I know we're in that period, but is so stinkingly authoritarian. It's sort of like you fulfil the role you're given and that's it. That sort of has a lot of resonance today, I think, with stuff about personal freedoms and governments. And
Stephen
Sorry, go on,
first, then Georgia.
Yeah, Stephen.
It was just a point about tragedy, really, that a lot of historical plays in this period cast themselves as tragedies. But this is like the sixth act of Hamlet. So all the deaths have happened. What happens now? And that's always the issue when trying to impose a generic shape upon history.
Mm.
Do you have the downfall of a single noble figure, or do you have something which is celebrating the life of the folk, which has got more than one part and really just kind of rambles through? And I think it's a sort of it's an interesting point about trying to put a classical form onto a non-classical subject matter. They could have tried to make it a tragedy of a kind. They decided not to do that. And perhaps that's because everyone who knew about that would go, but civil war, but commons rising, you can't have a play without that. And so there's a tension between subject matter, if people are familiar with it, and the kind of classic generic plot shapes. Perhaps.
I think there's something interesting, because there's a clue there also about, what's the title of the play? Because, is it Gorboduc or is it Ferrex and Porrex? And, all of them are dead by Act 5. It's that sense of where does the focus of the play actually lie? And I don't think it lies specifically anywhere except for the themes that it's playing with.
Was it played in front of lawyers? Have I got this mixed up with another
Absolutely,
play?
yes. It's is it the Inner Temple? So yeah, and before the Queen, at least once. So it is very much interested in debate, and that's in a sense what this scene to some degree is. I think when we've got string 'em up, oh, how could they? Maybe we should just trick them and kill as few as possible. There's a hint of that there, in there. Yeah, it's in a temple. So, and in fact, the rest of the scene, I suspect, will possibly dance around some ideas. Of course, then in the very first act, we have effectively a debate about the king wants to divide his kingdom. Is this a good idea? The first councillor says, it's all right. And the second councillor goes, well, it's okay, but maybe don't split it yet. Maybe split it once you're dead. And then the third one says, no, it's a really bad idea. But he doesn't say it outright. He sort of sneak says it. It's like, it's a good idea. Lots of people will die. It's fine. It's fine. Lots of people are going to die. It's fine. It's fine idea. Lots of people are going to die. And then he does it anyway. So there's a sort of debate element to it that's there, I think. But then again, whether we are interested in that today, I don't know. Let's see. Anyway, the scene is not finished. There is more to go. So I love the way that hanging ending goes as well. You finish your argument and then you go, this is, my lords, the sum of mine advice. What do you think? Yes, you're muted.
I'm muted. If you were using a cue script, it's a very good and obvious, my speech is over, it's time for your bit.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, it's a good chunky old one that you could lose your cue point, couldn't you? It's not like the earlier ones where you might get a sense of where the speech is going. Oh,
plus if you forget your lines midway through the speech, you can just jump to "This is, my lords, the sum of my advice."
Yeah. I'm done. Though not as bad as the actor who once just stopped mid-speech and just turned to the other actor and just said, I just don't know what to say. And just left it there. Left everybody else to sort out how the play ended. Okay, so that's the end of your advice. Let's hear what the last few councillors say about that before they exit.
Neither this case admits debate at large, and though it did, this speech that hath been said hath well abridged the tale I would have told. Fully with Eubulus do I consent in all that he hath said, and if the same to you, my lord, may seem for best advice, I wish that it should straight be put in you.
My lords, then let us presently depart, and follow this that liketh us so well.
So you won them over, and they exit Clotyn, Mandud, Gwenard, and Eubulus, leaving Fergus behind.
If ever time to gain a kingdom here were offered man, now it is offered me. The realm is reft, both of their king and queen. The offspring of the prince is slain and dead. No issue now remains, the heir unknown. The people are in arms and mutinies. The nobles, they are busied how to cease these great rebellious tumults and uproars. And Britain land now deserted, left alone. Amid these broils, uncertain where to rest, offers herself unto that noble heart that will or dare pursue to bear her crown. Shall I, that am the Duke of Albany, descended from that line of noble blood which hath so long flourished in worthy fame of valiant hearts, such as in noble breasts of right should rest above the baser sort, refuse to adventure life, to win a crown? Whom shall I find enemies that will withstand my fact herein, if I attempt by arms to seek the same now, in these times of broil? These dukes' poor power can hardly well appease the people that already are in arms. If perhaps my force be once in field, is not my strength in power above the best of all these lords now left in Britain land? And though they should match me with power of men, yet doubtful is the chance of battles joined. If victors of the field we may depart, ours is the sceptre then of Great Britain. If slain amid the plain this body be, mine enemies yet shall not deny me this, but that I died, giving the noble charge to hazard life for conquest of a crown. Forthwith therefore will I in post depart to Albany, and raise in armour there all power I can. And here my secret friends by secret practice shall solicit still, to seek to win to me the people's hearts.
Oh, he does do some good soliloquies, doesn't he? He's very good at them. It's not a play that's actually interested in dialogue in very much. I mean, and that's clearly part of what it's doing. Is it's much more interested in people making these declarations, but when they do them so well, he's just delightful. And it's not an unreasonable argument, actually. If he's the best man for the job, why shouldn't he do it? Why not? Why not?
Too right.
There's no king. Everybody's dead. He's probably quite good on the battlefield. Why do we feel that he's a villain?
I think it's some of the wording that's used, actually, because I'll be honest, as I was listening to it, I kept thinking, something's going to happen, just because some things that he says, especially towards the end, I was particularly struck by the lines, "Mine enemies yet shall not deny me this, but that I died giving the noble charge to hazard life for conquest of a crown." And, the fact that he's saying that he'll depart to Albany, everything there, and there's something going on there. Somehow, just because of that phrasing, I'm not sure that this Fergus is one to be trusted as yet. Something's going to happen. It's just from those phrases. "Mine enemy shall yet not deny me this," and it's like, okay, that's quite forthcoming from somebody that we've only just met. I wonder what will happen next.
He's been he was quite aggressive in the council earlier. He was there very much for killing everybody. That was sort of his. There can be no punishment thought too great for this grievous crime. So he's quite forthright.
I think it's the coda as well. He says secret twice, which is always a warning to me that if it's taking place clandestinely, it's not going to be good. And it's very sibilant, that last line, that "my secret friends, my secret practice shall solicit still," just sounds hissy and villainous.
Yes. Sorry, yes, go on.
And it's also that last line, just following on from what he was saying there, "to seek to win me the people's hearts." Political? Maybe not. I don't know. Something's going to happen, though.
I'm aware that we never actually went to Georgia earlier. I don't know what you were going to. There was a back and forth, and I actually forgot to then go to you.
It's fine. I was just going to say the same thing about the Q scripts as Liza, that it seems like a really clear example of like putting in place that structure in case the actor forgets or in case the other person gets lost listening to that. Like, it was a really nice example of like structurally having that in place for the cast. That I just wanted to pick up on. And then I was going to ask as well if it was played for lawyers, which we talked about. But it does have the feeling of one of those legal dramas. And then someone stays behind and looks into the camera like in The Office, but in a much more serious sense, and is like, my secret friends, I'm trusting you with this. And you just, the reason he feels not to be trusted, I think, is that sibilance, and also the fact that he's confiding in the audience. So intently staying behind and has clearly thought about it before, to me. Yeah, that's it.
It's a tough speech in terms of breathing. It's not the sort of, I mean, this seemed to me to be the case with the earlier speech as well. Grammatically, it's ridiculously complex.
This edition seems to have some issues with punctuation.
Right.
Yes, I'd always ignore the punctuation with anything.
Yeah, but there's still grammatically, even if you ignore the punctuation, there's only about like 2 sentences there.
Well, it reminds me of if we go back 30 years from the here to John Hayward. I mean, most of that is never-ending speeches with no full stops until the very end of the before the next person speaks. I mean, that's where the full stop lives. So I'm wondering
would that not particularly appeal to lawyers, though? That kind of filibustering, Ciceronian kind of I'm never going to pause. All of this is inserted clauses.
It might also be, that's how you know when your cue is. When they stop talking.
Applies to any play.
Oh no! Just in the other plays, you have pauses. I don't know how often these speeches are designed to pause. I mean, that doesn't mean you can't, but
there is a political point there as well, which is that while everybody is, being triggered by the Commons, he says, actually, here's my alternative analysis of the situation, which is you're looking at a symptom. Actually, what the situation is these people are dead, these people are dead. Everything is, the sort of force of the state is completely dissipated. And so in a way, it could be read as a sort of counter-political point to the one that everybody's making up until that point, which is, yes, we have a crisis, but the crisis is that the Commons are up in arms. And he spends the first sort of 8 lines or whatever saying, you may call it a crisis, I call it an opportunity, and this is why, and lists it. So there's a sort of switch of perspective from this as well. If we think about it being a sort of work of instruction of some kind, they don't rest with just kind of bashing the Commons. We've got a sort of Volta in political terms here.
Yes, it's not that the Commons are uprising; it's that there is no king to stop them. That's what we expect the Commons to do if they are not being kept controlled in a suitable regal fashion. Yeah, I deliberately. I mean, he's obviously a bit of a rotter, but by just the way it's written. But I wanted to put the case that maybe he is the leader that they deserve and need, and I thought I'd throw that out there and see how convincing it was.
And then he disappears from the play.
And then he's gone. I like so many characters. He is gone. We move to another scene, and I think the biggest scene of the play. There are so many people in this. Oh, there's almost 6. So I've got one of you doubling to be the messenger later on. But otherwise, Eubulus, Clotyn, Mandud, Gwenard, and Arostus are yes. So people sort of enter later, isn't it? So this is an opening soliloquy by Eubulus, isn't it? Don't think anyone else is supposed to be here listening to you. And then the scene sort of enters unto you. So maybe this speech should be thought of as a counterpoint to the one we've just had, rather than one to close one scene and another to open another.
There seems to be a bit of exposition as well.
Mm.
So what happened when they followed the advice I gave them last time?
Yeah. Okay, well, let's find out what happened. So it is just Eubulus alone.
Oh, Jove, how are these people's hearts abused? What blind fury thus headlong carries them? That though so many books, so many rolls of ancient time record what grievous plagues light on these rebels, aye, and though so often their ears have heard their aged fathers tell what just reward these traitors still receive, yea, though themselves have seen deep death and blood by strangling cord and slaughter of the sword to such assigned, yet can they not beware? Yet cannot stay their lewd rebellious hands, but suffering to foul treason to disdain their wretched minds, forget their loyal heart, reject all truth, and rise against their prince. A ruthful case that those whom duties bond, whom grafted law by nature, truth, and faith, bound to preserve their country and their king, born to defend their commonwealth and prince, even they should give consent thus to subvert the Britain land, and from the womb should spring, O native soil, those that will needs destroy and ruin thee, and eke themselves in fine. For lo, when once the Duke had offered grace of pardon sweet, the multitude, misled by traitorous fraud of their ungracious heads, one sort that saw the dangerous success of stubborn standing in rebellious war, and knew the difference of princes' power from headless number of tumultuous routs, whom common country's care and private fear taught to repent the terror of their rage, laid hands upon the captains of their band, and brought them bound unto the mighty dukes. Another sort, not trusting yet so well the truth of pardon, or mistrusting more their own offence than that they could conceive such hope of pardon for so foul misdeed, or for that they their captains could not yield, who fearing to be yielded fled before, stole home by silence of the secret night. The third, an unhappy and enraged sort, from traitorous furor could not be withdrawn by love, by law, by grace, nay, yet by fear. With minds hopeless of life, dreadless of death, careless of country, and aweless of God, stood bent to fight as furies did them move with violent death to close their traitorous life. These by all power of horsemen were oppressed, and with revenging sword slain in the field, or with the strangling cord hanged on the trees, where yet the carrion carcasses do preach the fruits that rebels reap of their uproars, and of the murder of their sacred prince. But lo, where do approach the noble dukes, by whom these tumults have been thus appeased?
And we'll just pause there. You're right, it is a bit of a recap. It's not a cheerful scene that you're relating to us at all.
Well, 2/3 of them got away. They either accepted the pardon or stole home by night. The third, not so lucky.
Mm. And this is where sort of starting to think around it, around the text, because obviously not much physically happens on stage, and do we take a cue from the dumb shows to be including some more visual material while this text is delivered? Is there some physical action occurring? What are we doing with music? This play demands music for the dumb shows, so I see no reason why we can't utilize music throughout if we so desire. What do we do with a speech like this, which is relating action? Do we want to play around with it in terms of what's going on? Because the previous scene is all relating things that have happened that the dumb show itself could deal with, to some degree deals with. This is action between the scenes.
It feels a bit cliched these days, I guess, but because of the dumb shows, it feels that if you were putting it on its feet today, an idea would be to make it some sort of mixed media thing, that actually this feels like something that would go across archive footage of something, depending on what period you put it into. Or that it's almost like, just the more we read these scenes as sort of bubbles in the middle of an ongoing ticker tape, like a 24-hour news cycle, where this is kind of almost a pause. I guess it's a bit of a cliche thing to do that, and it's been done with all these sort of history plays and what have you. But yeah, because less happens in it than your average Dryden play, it feels it needs something visual.
And just because some things are a bit of a cliche, so long as we do it well, it doesn't matter. You know, it's all a cliche. It's all old hat. People have been doing mixed media for 100 years. I mean,
absolutely.
It sort of invites it, actually. That it invites that sort of, we know that this has been done a lot, tongue-in-cheek mixed media approach. It almost feels like he's coming on either specifically from that battle, and he's all like, "Oh, Jove, this has happened." In that classic way, or as if it is actually being played as a sort of news bulletin-esque thing, and that you've had the kind of talking in private rooms, and now there's someone like live from the battle in which this is happening. Like it has that, it sort of strongly reads like that, especially because this is a character that has been the voice of reason and has had a bit of humanity, but is in a world that's sort of where everyone is sort of being like, "Oh, just stamp them down." It almost seems like he is the fittest one to give these bulletins, these sort of not apolitical, but these sort of more public broadcasty ones.
I mean, it's also that thought in my head is, almost it's asking that, we've got a very small number of speakers in the play at any one time, that almost you want to hand over to a team of dancers to actually do something physical with it. I feel that, there's almost 5 short ballet pieces or, physical theatre pieces that go almost around this text as another way of looking at it.
I wonder also if the sort of the mixed media thing, the fact that it is cliche, actually fits with what you were saying before we started recording about history tends to repeat itself. When you look at that Chronicle of Holland's, it's this sort of endless cycle of kings making, monarchs making poor decisions and being deposed. I mean, it also struck me as well, I think I'm allowed to mention him here, Noel Coward, of his cavalcade that he staged, which has rarely, if ever, been revived, because its resources are too great. It's high points in the 20th century, but you see these sort of flash scenes with sort of a small number of people, but then you have that background provided by, when they originated it, hundreds of extras, sort of providing the pomp scenes or the kind of Queen Victoria's funeral. It just struck me that it reminded me of that a bit.
I mean, that's not to say we can't just do it very simply and with actors and but I'm just sort of throwing it out there as as we come into these final straits, thinking ahead, what could be done with this text in alternative ways. Any additional thoughts before we go back to something like dialogue?
Just confirming that I'm also Nuntius.
Yes, at the moment,
Okay.
unless somebody else would like Nuntius. I didn't give it to Gwen or to Clotyn because they bookend it. But if anyone else who's not Gwen or Nuntius or Clotyn wants to jump in, if Liza's happy to give it up.
Oh, absolutely. Equally happy to do or not do. It's Georgia's first time here. Would you like more to do, Georgia?
Oh, I'm happy to have it if you're giving it up. Yeah.
Sure. There's some tricky punctuation, so take your time. But I know you. Yeah. But I know you've got this.
Thank you. I'll take him. Is it just that speech? I just have to highlight it, or I won't see it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yes. Yes. You will. We've got this little bit of dialogue first. We'll pause before we get to the Nuntius. So we have suddenly this entrance of other characters. We have Clotyn, Mandud, Gwenard, and Arostus enter.
I think the world will now at length beware and fear to put on arms against their prince.
If not, those treacherous hearts that dare rebel, let them behold the wide and huge fields, with blood and body spread, with rebels slain, the lofty tress clothed with corpses dead, that strangled with the cord do hang thereon.
Arostus.
I've not issued an Arostus. Oh well, no, I'll read it. A just reward, such as all times before have ever allotted to those wretched folks.
But what means he that cometh here so fast?
Enter Nuntius.
My lords, as duty and my truth doth move, and of my country work and care in me, that if the spending of my breath avail to do the service that my heart desires, I would not shun to embrace a present death. So have I now, in that wherein I thought my travail might perform some good effects, ventured my life to bring these tidings here. Fergus, the mighty Duke of Albany, is now in arms, and lodgeth in the fields with 20,000 men. Hither he bends his speedy march, and minds to invade the crown. Daily he gathereth strength, and spreads abroad, that to this realm no certain heir remains, that Britain land is left without a guide, that be the sceptre seeks for nothing else but to preserve the people and the land, which now remains as ship without a stern. Lo, this is that which I have here to say.
Is this his faith? And shall he falsely thus abuse the vantage of unhappy times? O wretched land, if his outrageous pride, his cruel and untempered wilfulness, his deep dissembling shows of false pretence should once attain the crown of Britain land, let us, my lords, with timely force resist the news attempt of this our common foe, as we would quench the flames of common fire.
Though we remain without a certain prince to weld the realm or guide the wandering rule, yet now the common mother of us all, our native land, our country that contains our wives, children, kindred, ourselves, and all that ever is or may be dear to man, cries unto us to help ourselves and her. Let us advance our powers to repress this growing foe of all our liberties.
Yea, let us to my lords with hasty speed, and yea, O gods, send us the welcome death, to shed our bloods in fields, and leave us not in loathsome life to linger out our lives, to see the hugy heaps of these unhaps that now roll down upon the wretched land, where empty place of princely governance, no certain stay now left of doubtless heir. Thus leaves this guideless realm an open prey, thus endless storms and waste of civil war.
And we'll pause there. Yes, you're not reading it wrong. It's not written by Trump. It is Hughie.
It is Hughie, right?
Yes, it
Okay.
is.
That's a nice little speech of Gwenard's, though. Some nice alliteration there.
Mm.
Yeah.
And suddenly, where there was chaos, there is unity. It takes an invading army for suddenly everyone seems to be on the same page. I'm right on them being on the same page. They're not
Yeah.
contradicting each other, are they?
I'd agree with that. Yep.
So we have that opportunity now that the sudden appearance by the messenger, and I have to say this play is very good with its messengers. They don't speak too little. They don't just randomly say the people in Kent are up in arms. Details. He does a nice speech, but then gets out again. I like that. It's a well structured speech. And then yes, there's sort of this nice building of the three other characters. I like a lot. Thoughts before we move forward.
Again, just the fact that it's, like you were saying, it was performed for lawyers. It has that really nice structure. I can't remember what the rhetorical term for it, but building one, the trio kind of adding. It's really nicely, there is a formality to it, which actually chimes with your idea of dance and what have you, that it's almost a choreographed kind of incremental speeches. Just struck me again there.
We could also dip into opera if we really wanted to, because there's a fair number of arias popping up and about. Of which I was going to ask, Alex, because I haven't given Arostus to anybody. I was going to ask if you could do this next massive speech sight unseen.
Yes, I'll give it a bash.
Because then we go back to Eubulus, who effectively acts as, I think, a chorus at the end. So we have two massive speech. We'll do this massive speech, and then we'll pause before we do the next massive speech, and see how that goes.
That ye, my lords, do so agree in one, to save your country from the violent reign and wrongfully usurped tyranny of him that threatens conquest of you all, to save your realm, and in this realm yourselves, from foreign thraldom of so proud a prince, much do I praise, and I beseech the gods with happy honour to requite it you. But, O my lords, sith now the heavens' wrath hath reft this land the issue of their prince, sith that the body of our late sovereign lord remains no more, since the young kings be slain, and of the title of descended crown, uncertainly the diverse minds do think, even of the learned sort, and more uncertainly will partial fancy and affection deem, but most uncertainly will climbing pride and hope of reign withdraw to sundry parts, the doubtful right and hopeful lust to reign, when once this noble service is achieved, for Britain land the mother of ye all, when once ye have with armed force repressed the proud attempts of this Albanian prince that threatens thraldom to your native land, when ye shall vanquishers return from field and find the princely state an open prey to greedy lust and to usurping power, then, my lords, if ever kindly care of ancient honour of your ancestors, of present wealth and noblest of your stocks, yea, of the lives and safety yet to come of your dear wives, your children, and yourselves, might move your noble hearts with gentle ruth, then have pity on the torn estate, then help to salve the well-near hopeless sore, which ye shall do, if ye yourselves withhold the slaying knife from your own mother's throat. Her shall you save, and you, and yours in her, if ye shall all with one assent forbear once to lay hand or take unto yourselves the crown by colour of pretended right, or by what other means soever it be, till first, by common counsel of you all, in Parliament the regal diadem be set in certain place in governance, in which your Parliament and in your choice prefer the right, my lords, without respect of strength or friends, or whatsoever cause that may set forward any other's part. For right will last, and wrong cannot endure. Right mean I his or hers upon whose name the people rest by mean of native line, or by the virtue of some former law already made their title to advance. Such one, my lords, let be your chosen king. Such one so born within your native land, such one prefer, and in no wise admit the heavy yoke of foreign governance. Let foreign titles yield to public wealth. And with that heart wherewith ye now prepare thus to withstand the proud invading foe, with that same heart, my lords, keep out also unnatural thraldom of strangers' reign, ne suffer you against the rules of kind your motherland to serve a foreign prince.
Well, that's a really nice turn. Again, it's
Bit
that question.
topical too, with
Yeah.
Mary and Philip.
Yeah, let's not have foreign rulers. Not none of them foreign types. How do you choose your next king? I mean, that's the thing. It's all very well to get rid of this pretender who's coming in. What do you do next? Whereas everybody else has got caught up in we will defend our native land, rah 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 rah, and then we mention all this stuff about Parliament. That's fascinating, and especially if you're talking about how do you choose the right king, which hopefully get some lawyers in. They'll organise a debate properly about that. So. Yeah, I think that's a fascinating speech. I think that's another corker. It's just sort of a shame you kind of want a bit more meat, a bit more veg between the meat, if that makes sense. Thoughts?
I mean, again, just from a technical point of view, just from an acting point of view, without necessarily addressing the content, it is reading that cold. It just presses on and on and on and on. I mean, someone has peppered a handful of periods, full stops in it that serve absolutely no point whatsoever.
Yeah.
But it's like a train. I mean, it has a rhythm to it, but it is
then.
It is almost hectoring. It is almost a lawyer going, and then and append this to that. It's like a train. It's like trying to.
And yeah, I mean, this is the thing, is that this play overall is not, it's not a desperately long play. I mean, it's not short, but it's not excessively long. And it moves quickly. It's not a text that really wants to hang around too often. There are moments of slowness, I think, in the way it's written. But, I don't think, apart from Fergus's speech, which I think feels quite slow and mannered and deliberate, everything so far in this act has had a real energy to it all the way through. Perhaps too little light and shade, but other thoughts in the room as because we're nearly there. We're nearly at the end.
This is over. 1560s, you said?
1560, 160. It depends on how you define when the year ends and begins.
There's so we're sort of just off the tail end of Mary into Elizabeth.
Yeah, first few years of Elizabeth.
So there is a foreign prince alive who claims the kingship of England, and Elizabeth herself is unmarried. I think Philip did offer his hand to her, didn't he? Just as a sort of opening gambit.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
And there were a whole lot of foreign princes who would have been only too happy to marry her. Yeah,
and that emphasis on law and good government and parliament of your peers, and that all of that stuff, it feels very pointed, especially if she's performed before her. I think they say that it actually says it was performed before her Queen's Majesty. So it was performed for her. So presumably it's playing to themes that she will be receptive to. They're not idiots.
That speech there as well feels, to me, it feels pointedly pro everything she stands for. Without just saying, someone like the current, but like the fact that they are pointing out, let your such one, my lords, let be your chosen king, born within your native land. Such one prefer, and like all these qualities that obviously she has, and it's basically saying to her detractor, almost directly to any of her detractors in the audience, well, look at all these terrible alternatives. Like, she may be singular, but here's someone of and from and embodying the land, and especially the personification of Britain as this female powerful figure as well. It's just sort of subtle nods that she'll appreciate, I feel.
And none so subtle shade. I think it's right about at Mary. I think Liza's absolutely right on that. Unnatural thraldom of strangers' reign is almost as much a dig on Mary as it is on the country being usurped by foreigners. Kind of thought. I may be overstating that, but who knows? Okay, we're into the final straight. The person who's been with us almost since the very, very beginning gets the last word. I mean,
survived.
You survived. You survived everything. Well, Arostus did I think as well. I think he was in one of the councillors at the beginning. We were discussing the meaning of some of these names, and I think which is sort of touching on a sort of interlude tradition of giving people very obvious names, what means what they represent, and that your counsel is of the wiser sort, and that's sort of the idea, and that's something to look into further down the line in more detail. So we're going all the way back to Brutus, first king of the Britons, in your own time.
Lo, here the end of Brutus' royal line. And lo, the entry to the woeful wreck and utter ruin of this noble realm. The royal king and eke his sons are slain. No ruler rests within the regal seat. The heir to whom the sceptre longs, unknown. That to each force of foreign princes' power, whom vantage of your wretched state by sudden arms to gain so rich a realm, and to the proud and greedy mind at home, whose blinded lust to reign leads to aspire, lo, Britain realm is left an open prey, a present spoil by conquest to ensue. Who seeth not how many rising minds do feed their thoughts with hope to reach a realm? And who will not by force attempt to win so great a gain that hope persuades to have? A simple colour shall for title serve. Who wins the royal crown will want no right, nor such as shall display by long descent a lineal race to prove himself a king. In the meanwhile, these civil arms shall rage, and thus 1,000 mischiefs shall unfold, and far and near spread thee, O Britain land, all right and law shall cease. And he that had nothing today, tomorrow shall enjoy great heaps of good, and he that flowed in wealth, lo, he shall be bereft of life and all. Happiest he that then possesseth least. The wives shall suffer rape, the maids deflowered, and children fatherless shall weep and wail. With fire and sword thy native folk shall perish. One kinsman shall bereave another life. The father shall unwitting slay the son shall slay the sire and know it not. Women and maids the cruel soldier's sword shall pierce to death, and silly children, lo, that playing in the streets and fields are found, by violent hand shall close their latter day. Whom shall the fierce and bloody soldier reserve to life? Whom shall he spare from death? Even thou, O wretched mother, half alive, thou shalt behold thy dear and only child slain by the sword while yet he sucks thy breast. Lo, guiltless blood shall thus everywhere be shed. Thus shall the wasted soil yield forth no fruit, but dearth and famine shall possess the land. The towns shall be consumed and burnt with fire. The peopled cities shall wax desolate. And thou, O Britain land, whilom in renown, whilom in wealth and fame, shalt thus be torn. Dismembered thus, and thus be rent in twain, thus wasted and defaced, spoiled and destroyed, these be the fruits your civil wars will bring. Hereto it comes, when kings will not consent to grave advice, but follow willful will. This is the end when in young princes' hearts flattery prevails, and sage rede hath no place. These are the plagues when murder is the mean to make new heirs unto the royal crown. Thus wreak the gods, when the mother's wrath naught but blood of her own child may assuage. These mischief springs with rebels will arise, to work revenge and judge their princes fact. This ensues when noble men do fail in loyal truth, and subjects will be kings. And this doth grow when, lo, unto the prince whom death or sudden hap of life bereaves, no certain heir remains. Such certainty as not all only is the rightful heir, but to the realm is so made unknown to be, and truth thereby vested in subjects' hearts. To owe faith there, where right is known to rest, alas, in Parliament what hope can be, when is of Parliament no hope at all, which though it be assembled by consent, yet it is not likely with consent to end. While each one for himself or for his friend against his foe shall travail what he may. While now the state, left open to the man that shall with greatest force invade the same, shall fill ambitious minds with gaping hope. When will they once with yielding hearts agree? Or in the while, how shall the realm be used? No. Then Parliament should have been holden, and certain heirs appointed to the crown to stay their title of established right, and pled the people in obedience while yet the prince did live, whose name and power by lawful summons and authority might make a parliament to be of force, and might have set the state in quiet stay. But now, O happy man whom speedy death deprives of life, nay, is enforced to see these hugy mischiefs and these miseries, these civil wars, these murders and these wrongs of justice, yet must Jove in fine restore this noble crown unto the lawful heir. For right will always live, and rise at length, but wrong can never take deep root to last.
And so ends the play. That's a forceful one. You'd really give that passionate. Parliament should then be pull Parliament together to decide what happens next. It's a really powerful portrait of chaos and civil war. I mean, all of the bad things.
And of someone who sees what's happening while it's happening.
Yes, because it's not going to end. This is the thing: is that this civil war's going on. The play doesn't end on a conclusion. The tragedy is that with all these people dead and this invading army and this civil war, there isn't an end in sight. There is a possible end in sight, but it's not happening yet. It's unremittingly bleak in a sense. There's that little crumb of hope at the end.
Those last 4 lines are, I think, very much a nod to Elizabeth.
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. And it's also, you do bring the audience there, or there's the possibility of bringing the audience to your narrative at that very end, that you're slightly breaking out and talking to them when, you say, even thou, O wretched mother, half alive, even if it's just some random person in the audience, it feels like it's not to a character on stage or even a hypothetical. It feels like you're picking someone, even if it's, doesn't match their physical reality. And that there's potential with a lot of that you're really appealing to the people out there. Don't let this kind of thing ever happen. Living in a world of chaos. It's not a good thing, people. That's important. Thoughts about the play overall? I mean, obviously, most of you have only seen this act, but your sense of it, and do you send the audience away with this message, or what images possibly do we construct? Because there's no closing chorus. This is a character speech at the end.
I really like the sort of slightly unsettled note that it ends on, and without invoking the name that we mustn't invoke, what Stephen said earlier about when the Prince of Denmark carks it, it's kind of like it's the end of his personal story, and people have riffed on what happens after that and the constitutional crisis that ensues, but it doesn't really belong to that play. Whereas this, even though it's called Gorboduc, is almost a tangential figure in terms of this seems to be part of the ongoing story and these ongoing cycles of Britain, and I found that final speech really powerful, and it's sort of for me it threw up that sort of contradiction of the jackboot, but also needing some form of order, and who the hell decides what. And without getting overly topical about it, it really struck me at the moment of the frigging power vacuum we've got at the moment, in that we've got a prime minister who sort of got it by default, who is now absent from the scene, and we've shoved someone else in to replace him. And then what happens if that person disappears? That there is no one taking charge of this situation, which isn't a civil war, but is something that is affecting the entire country and causing the very ground that underpins the country to become unstable. And what do? Do you kind of do you invoke authoritarianism, or do you kind of go, well, each for their own and everyone decide? Yeah, that's sort of how it resonated with me. And actually I like the fact it's unsettled, and there is that bit at the end about going to, it's basically going, every cloud passes and nothing lasts forever. At the end, this too shall pass. But that it ends in this sort of still quite fermented, unstable way.
Because I was sort of looking at it almost as a lighting designer at the very end, just thinking, right, is this fading down to a single point of light, darkness? Or is this the stage world dissolving and we're just left with a space illuminated and everyone just leaves, and that there isn't a curtain call kind of moment? And the two are equally unsettling. But are you narrowing the focus down, or are you just whiting everything out? And that sort of hit me there, thinking about it as a live show. I mean, I've been thinking about it also what to do with it audio wise, and in many ways the audio version is very straightforward.
I think the second the thing that you mentioned there about the light spilling out, going back to what you said about him referencing people in the audience.
Mm.
And that's also, I mean, that to me is more unsettling as an audience member, particularly on something that's not pantomime, where I'm not expecting to be, you know, I go to a Shakespeare comedy by a Renaissance playwright and expect to be, you know, picked out, particularly in modern productions and what have you. I wouldn't necessarily expect that in what has set itself up as a tragedy.
This play doesn't or hasn't really interacted with the audience. I mean, there are speeches to them. I mean, Fergus's speech, I think, is pretty much the closest. I think, I don't know what Sascha thinks, but for the rest of the text, none of it's felt like there's that audience interaction
I'd agree
that we've
with that,
had,
actually.
even with relatively dark plays from around the same time. Any of the interludes that came before, or some things coming after, it's just there's so little here that does that. It's a very contained world.
I tell you what.
Agree.
Sorry, go on.
Liza first, then Sascha.
No, I've talked a lot. Please, Sascha, please carry on.
No, it was only just to say I agree with you, Robert, there. Although I would potentially add that depending on how it's staged, you could easily make the audience a little bit more enclosed as well with some of the speeches, so that you're kind of witnessing a little of what's going on, although you're not really supposed to witness it. But again, that would have to be depending on what director was to stage it like, if that makes sense. Whether you choose to cut off the audience in a Brechtian way, or whether you slowly open up, right up until Fergus's speech.
It's a question of how claustrophobic it is as well. I find it quite a claustrophobic play. And you know, it's the kind of worlds that we're being introduced to. They're very, very. I mean, it's a very small cast, but you know, and it lends itself to a relatively small space. There's that room for. It's obviously designed to have a visual aspect. It's not stripped back poor theatre in that sense. Georgia, coming in quite late to this play, but also new to the group. Your thoughts overall?
Similar to Sascha, I think it could easily and almost cries out for being made progressively more claustrophobic, or bringing the audience in as like the feeling that they've witnessed something and can't like wash their hands of it. I think that final unease lends itself really well to the sense that they're like not active, but they're witnesses as opposed to kind of spectators sat back. And it would, as Alex said, it would be uncomfortable, but I think that's how it feels, especially when you've got the idea of, if we were to bring in like balletic or dance or physical theatre going on around the set pieces, there's the idea that they're talking very bureaucratically, but you see going on around them perhaps quite brutal movement, or quite a lot of death. I mean, like, that's what they're talking about, but it's all in such legalistic terms that if you had the sort of tiny room lit with a bright light, bureaucratic, they're not seeing what's going on. But if the audience were immersed in a world of kind of chaos, and they are those people that are being the kind of peasants that have risen, or if they're being positioned in a certain way by these like heavily politicized characters, they kind of can't avoid that feeling of being implicitly involved. I think it even though they're not directly mentioned much, what Sascha said was spot on, that there is a way to bring them in production that could be really interesting to explore.
I mean, it's interesting. This act doesn't deal anywhere near as much as earlier acts have done with the irony of the setup. You know, each act we're told explicitly or implicitly what's going to happen in that act. You know, X is going to die. So you have a debate that goes on for several pages about what to do about this problem. We know that the debate is pointless, because we know we know what's going to come. But the debate is happening there anyway, and there's almost a sense of the purposelessness to some of these debates, or the absurdity of some of the positions are sort of highlighted. I mean, the only element I think here is when they're talking about there's that brief bit of dialogue before the messenger comes in, of, you know, going, I think the world will now at length beware and fear to put on arms against their prince, and then the messenger comes in, we've been invaded.
Almost comically. It's an almost comical moment of that.
But it's a very brief moment as compared with the rest of the play, where it's very sustained, adding to the sense of doom, perhaps. Liza, you wanted to say something earlier.
Oh, well, we were tossing around ideas of how one might stage this scene, which, as you said, is one of the biggest in the play, 6 whole entire people.
Yes.
And I quite like the idea of, after Eubulus' speech, when the others enter, of them entering in armor and unarming, of them like unbuckling the breastplates and getting the mail shirts off and just going, and then the messenger coming in, presumably lightly armed, and saying, no, we're being invaded. And they're just being, maybe some of these guys are wounded, maybe some of them can't stand up, and them being like, yea, let us to my lords with hasty speed. And maybe they sort of move to pick up the armor and then pause for Arostus's speech. But I like the idea of these horribly exhausted, probably hurt characters putting their heavy armor back on during Eubulus's speech and being like, no, we thought we were done. We have to go out there again. This isn't going to end well, but we have no alternative.
Especially if the messenger is more mud spattered than blood spattered. The messenger's, it's the suggestion that he's out of breath and he's just run from, with great haste, whereas they've come from, a certain amount of killing, and there's more killing to come. And that question of costuming, what you're doing to the costumes as well.
That messenger, speaking of the lack or the not need, the kind of the lack of punctuation or kind of the irrelevant punctuation of the play, actually that was one where the lack of punctuation really fed it and made it easy to sustain and to kind of have the breathlessness without actually running out of what you were saying. The way the lines were written, and the way some were lightly punctuated actually made it quite easy to breathe as an actor, but also quite technically useful that you got that sense of momentum and that you just run on. Like, I found it quite, it was kinder to the actor than the Mandud speeches, definitely, in just making that sense of where he's come from.
Right. It's interesting. I'm just we're not really going to have time to look at the additional stuff from Holingshed, but I was just looking at what comes next, or what Holingshed says about this, and there's some interesting elements about. Actually, Holingshed doesn't quite agree. There's a question of which source is accurate about what actually happens in the nature of this play. There's the English Chronicle saith that Porrex that he was fled into France and on his return was slain. But Geoffrey of Monmouth says Porrex, devising ways to kill Ferrex, achieved his purpose and slew him. And so it's nice that there isn't even actually, even at the time, an absolute account of what this story should be. But it is quite clear that after this followed a troublous season full of cruel war and seditious discord, whereby in the end, and for the space of 50 years, the government or monarchy or sole government of the island became a pentrarchy. So there were 5 rulers. The question of who's ruling and that's coming up is an interesting one about how where that comes possibly from the original source, and making questions about Parliament, which obviously is completely not a thing from Geoffrey of Monmouth or anybody else.
It's a bit off topic, but in the 90s, when London theatre starts eating material, this story pops up again. There's a version of it. We have titles of plays, and there's a play called Ferrex and Porrex, and there's also a play called Mormutius Dunwallow, So it's a different thing. You can imagine it. You can imagine it on an Elizabethan stage much more easily, I think, and you can imagine an adaptation, what an adaptation would do in terms of the staging possibilities there. But it's a subject matter that, you know, it may seem to be sort of a random prehistorical thing, but it's that kind of subject matter continued to matter to people.
Yeah. I mean, I think Steve and we've talked about this before, of the sort of Marvel extended universe of history plays, that you have different companies doing different takes on essentially the same material, and that they overlap and they're in conversation. You know, this is history. You know, it maybe there's some question marks are increasingly appearing about how true this stuff is, but these are all, you know, kings of Britain. These are all historical entities that mattered to people on some level, if only as a good story. So, you know, this follows on from King Lear, which has its a play that we will look at some point, and there are other ones that intersect and connect with this that we'll slowly, hopefully, piece together as we go on, and that just the way you do it changes. There's another play that interests me in connection with this about the debate element, because we've touched on the podcast play, which is a debate play between God and Satan, about the legality of God stealing Adam and Eve from hell during the harrowing, which is about the same time as this. We don't have the complete script, so we don't actually know what really happens in the debate portion. But that sort of sense of these debating figures sort of connects and is it seems to be something that the Inns of Court and the Inner Temple and these more learned institutions are very interested in staging active debates on difficult topics.
Well, it's also courtly entertainment. You know, we've got loads of surviving courtly entertainments which are just humongous speech after humongous speech, aren't they? You know, they're not kind of dramas in the sense that we now understand them. So there's a whole kind of spectatorship and actors' virtuosity, which is kind of lost to us if we just look at plays, or we just judge some text like this by standards of, you know, implicitly standards of a public theatre or an interlude street theatre style. You know, there's a kind of I don't know, the word would be quasi or paradramatic or something like that. You know, so the spectators would be perhaps more prepared for this kind of thing than we find easy to imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, you know, yes, it is made of lots of speeches, and you know, we need to sort of work with it. But actually, this play has not made me go, I would never do this at all. Reading this, I think you've got to approach it right, and you've got to, you know, decide how you're going to pitch it. But you know, I can entirely see a production of this, you know, that I will one day do, and that's partly why I've asked to talk about staging it today. As part of this, you know, presenting this as an audio piece is very straightforward. There isn't much to do with this beyond deciding what to do with the dumb show material, you know, which doesn't make great audio. But in terms of staging it, we've got it invites picking all the things out of the box. You know, we've got music, we've got visual, almost spectacle. We've got, you know, imagery that's not connected with plot. And that invites playing with it, but without necessarily cutting it or doing anything radical to the text, because the text, as I say, is not very long. It's not like it overstays its welcome.
The long speeches are surprisingly difficult to cut just because the rhetoric follows on. Yeah.
But they move quickly, so, you know, I forgive them their length. If they were slow and tedious, I'd give up and just walk away.
Everyone in the cast has an espresso before curtain.
Yeah. Because you know, it has got some genuinely brilliant speeches. I think, you know, there's 3 in this where I'm going, I like these speeches. I'd like these as speeches. They are doing all the muscularly, actorly things that I like. But you're allowed to disagree. I mean, it's a democracy. This is a parliament, after all. We're into extra time, so I'm going to sort of go around the room with final thoughts, either about the play, what you have read here, or what you might want to do with it, or just thoughts of the future. Any parts you particularly want? You know, if you as an actor, you can covet parts if you wish. That's entirely allowed. So we'll just. I'll start with Sascha, because you were here at from the off. Any sort of overarching thoughts?
Well, all I can say is I've really enjoyed this experience. I mean, I've enjoyed every play so far on throughout this project, but this one, you know, it has to be one of the most exciting plays that I've read, and one of the best speeches possible to actually do. So if you do an audio or a stage version of this, I really would love to be involved, especially as the Queen and any other parts that may be able to be doubled up, if depending on which way you go.
I think for audio, well, I'll just put you down for Vidina. Shall I? Shall I just put you down now? That's fine. We'll do that now.
Well, all right, great. Thank you.
I can't. Any other parts for audio are not guaranteed, but because I'll probably go for individual voices.
That's fine.
Yeah, that we'll say that it's a year, maybe two.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an order form in for that one. Liza, coming in on Act 5, thoughts?
Yeah, well, you know, I quite liked Act 5. The ending, like we were all saying earlier, the ending is, I sort of love the lack of resolution and the bleakness. It's like, no, things are not going to get better. They might eventually, but not for a long time, which is a hell of a message to end on. And I did quite enjoy being Eubulus, cold read though it was. I would like very much to get better acquainted with these speeches, and better acquainted with the writer in general, and with the rhetoric of this play. Those who have witnessed more of this play than I have, I would ask, how distinct are the different characters' voices?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. I don't know how distinct. I mean, some of them are. I mean, they definitely. You know that they've got a different position, but actually asking voices, you know, whether they're written with a. I think I felt Fergus definitely felt like he had a different voice to the others. Less so than perhaps in other plays, but I think there is a distinction with a difference. Sascha, do you agree? I don't know. I'm genuinely not sure.
It's an interesting. I know what you mean. It is an interesting one, Robert, because I think for certain characters you can tell who they are straight away, and especially as I'll be honest, I could even hear some voices in my head, especially with the male roles, that I would potentially put into certain characteristics, you know, like Eubulus or Gorboduc, and the princes especially. You know, I can hear one lighter voice, you know, like a bratty throw-out voice, so to speak, the other more controlled. But, you know, that's only a first instinct. But there are definitely characters that you could get really experimental with, I think.
Yeah, I think that's one to delve into. I think there's enough meat there to be working with. But I mean, the overall voice of the piece seems to be slightly more powerful than the individual voices of characters. I think that's fair to say. I think that's fair.
Definitely goes without saying, I think.
Is there a follow-on from that question? Sorry, Liza. It's just, were you asking for a purpose?
No. I genuinely wanted to know. That's pretty much all I got. But thank you for asking.
Yep. Alex, any final thoughts?
Well, picking up on that point, I wonder whether that's actually part of its strength and appeal for actors, if it's not overly coloured, that actually, because it's overall a very strong piece, that it allows you some leeway without being hemmed in by kind of a prescribed character that's going to sound like this. I mean, I agree. I love that sort of bleak ending, and I think perhaps its strength. Obviously, I haven't seen the first 4 acts, but the strength in this act seems to me that it manages to be simultaneously a very intimate piece, but also kind of, in terms of Great Britain, global in its sort of concern, in its compass. And I think that's really powerful. I think it was Sascha earlier mentioned Brecht, and that actually it does have that power where you kind of go and watching this little group of characters, but actually they're speaking something huge about a world and a politics. And I love it. I remember, it's weird, I remember not being overly fond of it at university, reading it, drawing the page, and I remember absolutely squeeing with joy over the massacre at Paris. And if this experience has taught me anything, it's that I think I love Gorboduc, and I really don't have any time for the massacre at Paris.
I think it's an interesting association with some of the closet drama we've done, looking at Tragedy of Antony, which on the page looks as boring as hell, but actually when you start digging into it, lots of really interesting stuff comes out.
It feels a very rich piece, and particularly actually that bit of Hollinshead that you read. I wonder whether there would be any way of, not that it needs it, but almost contextualizing it within that sort of what goes before it and what comes out of it. That what we're seeing is a series of snapshots in the middle of this cycle.
Some very Brechtian slides are coming, aren't they?
Just a bit.
Yeah.
Well, while the physical actors are all like doing their interpretive dance, you could scroll it. You could do like your Star Wars text crawl over the stage.
I mean, the actual text on the narrative of this play is very short as well. So there's so much room for manoeuvre to play around with it and do. I mean, it's also sometimes looking at plays and going, right, well, I kind of want to write more and do something else with this as a counterpoint, or and there's so much potential with history plays of delving into what's true and what's not, or interpretations. Georgia, your first time.
Yeah, a lot of fun. To that end, I think similar to Alex's point, it feels like a real ensemble piece, and like in a really nice way, giving that freedom to the cast of how they would portray it. And a thought I had kind of form-wise and dramaturgically, if we were going Brechtian, is that at the end, when there's that glimmer of hope that wrong can never take deep root, it would be interesting if we just saw someone like Fergus, I don't know, walking towards the what's that thing called? The kind of pulpit or something, or plotting in the corner, or just still there because he disappears, of course, but like the idea that it's cyclical.
Just walks up behind Eubulus and then
the lights go down.
That's so cool.
But there's just some sort of piece of action that suggests it's going to carry on again for another 50 years, because it keeps making reference in that rich text of how history keeps repeating. And that bleakness of having someone still there, still playing, as it were.
You could introduce Gorboduc at the beginning of the play with some kind of gesture like that, and then at the end of the play you could give Fergus the same gesture, and then have him murdered and have someone else do the same gesture.
And finally, Stephen, any final thoughts? We've been going for playing around with it in a very modern context, but feel free to defend its honour from the 1560s.
Well, no, I was absolutely the other direction. Actually, I was listening to what people were saying about intimacy and pondering the way we've actually done it. And wondering whether there are elements of intimacy in the play that actually respond to this kind of whatever you call this. I was thinking about Blair Witch Project. The speeches about everything falling apart, and this is I can't remember the rest of the play at all, but just this fifth act. You've got these big speeches, which are sort of the way we've been doing them. They're kind of extended close-ups in very intimate settings. And you've got this sort of, I don't know how you've got your screens. I've got my screen so I can see 6 people at once.
Yeah.
And the play is kind of like, this act of it is kind of like, well, you only really need to be attending to one person at a time, because they kind of take turns, and it doesn't do that sort of drama-y thing with groups that we're used to. So I was struck by how interesting this is as a way of thinking about the play. And I don't know if people have heard of Imitating the Dog. There's a company based up my neck of the woods, and one of the things they do is they incorporate sort of live video filming into their shows. And I was watching one of their shows online the other day, which was a shot-by-shot reconstruction of Night of the Living Dead. So they were doing it live, filming themselves to try and reproduce the movie, which was also showing. And the sort of strange close-up power and power to produce claustrophobia that this technology has got, I think is actually quite interesting as well. So, you know, you could almost imagine a play like this with not that many characters, and not a huge amount of toing and froing, and certainly not a sort of street theatre vibe, actually having a strange kind of life in this sort of medium. And I wonder if the way that we're responding to it is actually different because we can see each other the way we are seeing each other, rather than if we're all just sat around in a circle, mostly listening.
I think that's a really, really, really good idea, actually. You know, it's the one medium, actually, I haven't done very much with is actually video, and thinking that, you know, that actually perhaps it would actually make quite a good film in a sort of weird way. Yeah, that sort of, what is it, The Passion of Joan of Arc, which is almost entirely done in close-up shots of people, and it's very stark cuts between faces and that sort of idea. I saw Sascha waving.
Do you know what? Expanding on that, actually, it actually makes total sense what Stephen was saying there, because you know, it's almost like, you think about it with the claustrophobia of this piece, it's almost like a Big Brother scenario. Everybody's watching each other, and you know, if you don't have a certain password, you can't get in. You know, that kind of aspect, and you could almost apply it to some of these speeches. I mean, even for example, some of the long monologues, if we put it into a modern context, you know how YouTube influencers do video vlogs? Yeah, I can see some of the speeches actually done as if it's a personal vlog type thing.
And also, you don't need to worry about breathing because they cut out all the any little error or gap between text, and I can almost see some of these speeches just jumping from thought to thought with very minor cuts.
I agree with that. Yeah.
You could have Eubulus's last speech. You could have the actor start it out live, then fade the lights out and go to a news broadcast or a political broadcast with the actor continuing the same speech, and just drown those last 4 lines in static and have the signal be lost.
Well, I think taking Stephen's point about, you know, that complete interaction between film and stage, you know, video and stage. With there's an earlier scene. There's 2 parallel scenes with the 2 sons deciding whether they should kill each other.
That's right.
And using film and live staging at the same time there, especially if we're doing extreme doubling and they're essentially being each other, you could actually use video to do some really interesting effects about overhearing the other person, and now I have to kill him because I know he's going to kill me, and that creates quite an interesting live effect as well as just something recorded as well. Ooh, this went well. Any final thoughts? We've gone around the room. I think we should end on a high note. That was really positive and productive. If you are watching this video at home, are interested in doing something with Gorboduc, get in touch. We're here as much to champion your work as to try and create our own. You know, if you do want to do it, and this has been helpful, then do get in touch. You know, I definitely intend to do something with Gorboduc in the short to medium term, and this has been a wonderful way of thinking about it and digging into a play that many people have heard of and may vaguely have read, but just doesn't necessarily then go the next stage to actually being put on very often. So on that cheerful note, I'm going to say thank you to all the readers today, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.